Hello, I'm Todd Johnson, and this is Earlylands in Conversation. The critical minerals story in Africa is typically told through the lens of geology, geopolitics, and finance. Rarely does anyone talk about the unglamorous reality that sits between the mine and the market, the roads, the trucks, the borders, and the sheer logistical challenge of moving product across some of the world's most difficult operating environments. Clementine James knows that reality better than almost anyone. As a director and owner of Alistair Group, one of Africa's premier logistics operators, she has spent her career moving freight across corridors that would humble most supply chain professionals. That she has done so as an American woman in one of the most male dominated industries on earth makes her story all the more remarkable. Here is a number that puts the challenge in stark relief. A round trip between Dar es Salaam and Kolwezi in the Democratic Republic of the Congo takes her trucks 2 months to complete. 2 months. In that single data point lives the entire story of what it actually takes to bring critical minerals to market. Clementine is also one of the clearest voices supporting development of the Lobito Corridor, but also calling out the gap between the political hype around the initiative and the commercial framework that will determine whether it actually delivers. If you enjoyed this and our other episodes, please like and subscribe. We are pleased to welcome Clementine James to Earlylands in Conversation. Clementine, thank you very much. I'm sitting here looking at you in your lovely house in Joburg in an early winter's day. I'm a bit jealous of you as it's very warm here in Spain.
Great to be a part of this, and I've enjoyed listening to your other episodes.
I've known Clementine for a long time and deeply respected what she does and her brother does with the business with Alistair Group. But I was sitting at a border crossing between Namibia and South Africa recently. And it was not, as I told Clementine, not the most efficient thing in the world. And it highlighted to me that I think a discussion about logistics in Africa and the age-old question of how do I get my iron ore or my copper cathodes through the border quick and to market even quicker. And that's when I thought of Clementine and the Alistair Group story. So that's why we're here. First question. And this is one that, as I told my wife that we're going to do this, she wanted me to focus on you as an American woman running a trucking logistics company in Africa. And I want that, but I also want to hear about the challenges of running that from an operational standpoint. But you're an American woman with a Dartmouth degree, an Imperial College MBA. You spent nearly 15 years, if I'm not mistaken, building Alistair Group, which is a trucking logistics company across sub-Saharan Africa. That's not an obvious career path. Tell us how it happened. How did you get here? Give us the Alistair Group story.
Well, there's definitely quite a few stories within the story, but I think maybe one way to start is I found that we grew up on the eastern shore of Maryland as a family, and I suppose maybe a little bit differently than some of the other families in the region. As my mother was English, that was one reason we traveled often, is because we'd
Sure.
often go to England and then extend into Europe to visit her extended family. And then also, my parents just loved to travel. And we were lucky enough to compete in sailing teams as children that took us kind of all over South America and Europe. And so that definitely gave us the travel bug, so to speak.
And
And
us being you
I
and your brother, obviously, right?
Both
Alistair.
of my brothers, yes.
Yeah.
So I have
Okay.
2 older brothers. I'm the youngest of the family of 3, and we have all ended up living and working outside of the US for most of our lives. And I think when I finished off college at Dartmouth, I ended up, going in thinking I was gonna do pre-med, I was gonna be a doctor just like my father was, and I quickly realized that actually I wasn't that interested in the big lecture classrooms. I was much more engaged when I took smaller classes, and I found my
Sure.
home in the anthropology department, specifically sort of ethnography. And actually, my senior year thesis was about the watermen of the Chesapeake Bay and some of the pressures on the historical fishing career path and how it was failing today. And I just loved sort of listening to people and hearing other stories. And so I ended up majoring in anthropology. And then when I went to graduate, it felt like the career paths were the sort of corporate recruiting path, which seemed to take you to investment banking or management consulting. or to join the Peace Corps. And it seemed like this huge,
There's got to be
I don't
something
know.
in between, right?
Yeah, like there's got to be something in between. But it wasn't obvious to me what that would be. And so I just said, well, I'm going to go live in London because I was lucky enough to have a passport that would allow me to do so. And I thought at least I'll be ticking the travel box and I'll
Right.
prioritize that over a specific job. And so I think 6 years later, I actually found myself finishing off business school in London, still working full time for a great little sort of event management company that I became a shareholder in, and loving and settling in life in the UK. And one day I was cycling home and I just had this like gut feeling that I was settling and I wasn't ready to settle yet, and that I needed to go to a developing country. There were like more stories to hear, there were more adventures to be had before settling down. And so that made me decide to do my final project for business school. I joined my brother, my middle brother, Alistair, who'd moved to Tanzania right out of college himself to pursue hunting safari guide career path. And he'd had this
Again, another
inkling,
non-traditional for a kid from the Eastern Shore.
non-traditional, traditional. And so, he had this feeling that there could be a business in trucking in Africa. And so when I came down out of business school, we sort of put together an expansion plan, said, okay, how could we raise capital to buy a fleet of 100 trucks? What would the business look like if we were to do that? What systems, what people, what other processes would we need to be able to roll this out successfully? And that was the start of really creating something of scale. And that's where Alistair Group is today. So we are a sub-Saharan logistics business. We have over 1,300 employees. We operate over 600 of our own big rigs, you'd call them in America, and a
Right.
number of warehouses, border facilitation services and clearing services. And then we also trade a lot of commodities in and out of the mines and operate a number of port operations.
That's amazing. I think there's probably a lot more blood, sweat, and tears that went into it. And every time I talk to you, the challenges that you have, your day-to-day issues you're managing, the DRC Zambia border, some sort of, blockage or 3-day slowdown. I don't think any day that you have is quiet. This question is not going to surprise you. Commercial trucking in Africa certainly has got to be one of the most male-dominated industries on the continent, certainly in the world, right? Commercial trucking, I think, is a male-dominated industry anywhere. You're running fleets, managing cross-border operations, negotiating with governments, and leading teams in multiple jurisdictions. How do you do it day to day, right? I mean, the challenges, some of them pretty existential, right? If you have a border that's been blocked for some reason completely out of your control, how do you do it?
So, I mean, from a gender perspective, to be honest, like as a woman managing the business, I honestly don't think too much about it. I'm often Mr. James Clementine in a lot of official communication. People definitely assume that I am a man, but I think it's almost easier to break a barrier if you don't even really see it in the first
You just don't
place.
pay
And
attention to it,
so
right? You just
we
run
just
right
don't
through
pay
it.
attention. Yeah. Actually, in our management team, we're pretty balanced men and women wise. I think actually sometimes we find in a lot of the cultures in the countries we operate on, it's hard for people to give bad news or communicate honestly.
Of course.
And
Right.
and actually I think women are much better at that, generally, telling it as it is. And so we're about 50-50 in our management level positions. I think women and men are blue collar positions, which are mechanics and drivers. It's much harder to find that gender
Sure.
balance, mostly because the routes that our trucks are driving are often over, as you say, multiple border crossings, many countries, and there's just not the like safe support service infrastructure to allow a woman to operate safely in that environment,
Right.
unfortunately.
So typical customers, I mean, you can change names and such, but industries, what are you guys transporting?
Yeah, so we have two core businesses. So one is really around what now has become the buzzword of critical minerals. And so what we do is we move goods in and out of mines that are producing critical minerals. So that means that we are trading in a lot of the reagents and commodities that a mine needs to run their plant, and then we're bringing back out those minerals themselves. So that could be copper, cobalt, tungsten, manganese, graphite, uranium, really a whole range of different products. And then our other side of the business is very focused on supporting traditionally offshore oil and gas industry, which involves port operations, shore-based services, etc. And I suppose the reason we've built a business around those industries is because they share our values of safety and we call it continual improvement, but basically efficiency and constantly trying to do something better the next time. So yeah, we've been able to grow when our clients kind of share the same values as us. I think for the space of the value chain we occupy, there's really very few direct competitors who do the
Right.
same scope of services that we do. But just in export logistics, so that's the transport, the clearing, the warehousing, and the
Right.
shipping of critical minerals, we compete with a number of multinationals.
Okay.
So Steinway Bridge or an Access World or an AGL. But then in each country or on a specific route or for a specific movement, there might be a trucking company or a clearing company that would occupy some of that value chain.
And how many vehicles do you guys own? You own a fair number of your vehicles or lease model.
We have a combination. So
Right.
we run about 600 of our own, fully owned, fully managed, and then we have about double that in a mixture of owner, lease, subcontractor capacity.
Right. Well, I'm just thinking, I'm putting my business school professor hat on, and I'm thinking, my gosh, there's a case study here to be written about you guys. Has there been a case written about Alistair Group yet?
No, you can be the
Okay.
first.
Yeah, I was gonna say, all right, I'm planting my flag on that one. You and I can talk about this after. But so when you look at the logistics sector today, and you guys cut across, probably not one sector that you would say that you're in, right? You cut across a number of different sectors. What are the two or three structural headwinds that you think are really holding the industry back?
I suppose that it's definitely I think there is a huge gap in the infrastructure itself. So, I mean, everybody thinks of infrastructure, they think of like power and roads,
Right.
and that's absolutely part of it in reality. So, it's we have a strict no night driving rule because there's very few proper highways with lighting in the
Sure.
region we operate on. So it's simply unsafe to be on the road at night. And there's a lot of issues, for example, on whether it's infrastructure or a lack of urban planning. I think the population of Dar es Salaam since I first moved there in 2010 has probably quadrupled, and
Right.
there's not the urban planning to support that. So, like, physically, to be able to find the space to run a scaled, efficient operation in and amongst that kind of population growth is extremely difficult.
Right.
But that lack or that underdeveloped infrastructure also means that when you have an accident, or it just means that accidents will happen, I suppose, because
With 600 vehicles on the road.
exactly. And, there's oftentimes, a town on both sides of the road and there's
Right.
lots of pedestrian traffic, or, there's other vehicles high speeding and overtaking into your lane head on. So there's, always going to be accidents. And as much as you train and retrain defensive driving, it's going to happen. And I think that when it happens, the two things that kind of keep us up at night are how do we create accountability for that accident? So maybe it is something. There's a lot of theft, especially of copper and cobalt. To actually hold a guilty party accountable and put them behind bars is almost impossible. There's a lot of corruption in that process. And so we find it very difficult to kind of like enforce culpability um, in the various jurisdictions, and that means that it's exceptionally difficult to provide the service that you want to. So you're
Right.
doing all of the mitigation, controlling the driving hours, moving in convoys, tracking your trucks, saying all sorts of escalations. But really, if we operated in a perfect world where there were beautiful, safe roads and there was like speed limits enforced and if there was an accident, there was like a full investigation reporting process that was reinforced by the rule of law, then our jobs would be a lot easier.
What about the structural kind of regulatory headwinds? I mean, there's always a World Bank or AFDB report talking about productivity losses and GDP losses because of weights at borders. Tell us about how it is, the reality of it. You are the ones actually waiting at the borders.
Yeah, I think people are often shocked to hear that our trucks spend significantly more time parked than they do moving. Our one of our main corridors moves from the port of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania through to the mines in say, Kolwezi in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and that round trip will take close to 2 months. So for a truck to go in,
Two
deliver to
months.
the mine, and turn around
Wow.
and come back, that driver's on a trip for 2 months. That's 2 months without seeing their families. That's 2 months of cooking on the side of the road. It's really difficult. And the trucks spend most of their time waiting for a piece of paper. So whether that be at the border itself to clear in, or maybe once they're loaded on the mine, it can often take minimum, like a good mine is about a 2-week export process to get the paperwork to export the cargo. So, we're thinking every day, how do we get those 60 days down to 45 days? And we track that, to a T, every single thing that we can control. But unfortunately, a lot of it's also out of our
Sure.
control.
That's like a 19th century sea voyage, right? 2 months to go from Dar to Kolwezi and back. And all the things you must have to think about, like you were saying, cooking on the side of the road, right? Or petrol, how do you pay for the petrol?
Yeah.
Sort of the logistics kind of boggle the mind a little bit.
Well, and that I think when we started the business, that was definitely a huge exposure as, you used to just give the driver an envelope of cash and hope that they'd make it to the
Right.
destination.
Right.
And so obviously as we grew, we put a lot of effort into really defining all of the payments, what the process is. So now we've developed our own transport management system, for lack of a better word, but it's integrated with a lot of the mobile money platforms
Right.
and a lot of the fuel providers and other expenses. So as a driver leaves Dar es Salaam and as they move down the route, those sort of mobile money payments for here's your parking for tonight, here's your fuel order at this fuel station, here's your per diem for the day so you can buy your food. All of those are released as they progress along the route
Right.
in an automated fashion. And that's really helped us control the cost, but also incentivize the drivers for efficiency.
Just the barriers to entry in the space. We always used to joke at GE about the barriers to entry in the jet engine business were so high, 2-3 billion
Mm.
dollars of costs, right? So that's why it was only GE, Rolls-Royce, Pratt Whitney. I think about what you guys are doing, the barriers to entry for somebody who wants to come in and sort of shake up that space from, like you were saying, the telematics of just tracking the vehicles to how do I get my driver their daily per diem to actually then just buying vehicles or leasing vehicles that are roadworthy, right? For a 2-month cross Africa trek. I mean, that is deeply impressive.
I don't know. I think that the barriers to entry for that integrated service are quite high, but the barriers to entry just like buying a truck and starting to move it, there's ways that you can do that now, third party softwares, et cetera. But it's
Sure.
what we found is that as soon as you get above 20 trucks, let's say,
Right.
there's just a lot to manage and you
Right.
really need the proper structure to do so.
We could just end it right there with that headline of the 2 months to get from Dar to Kolwezi and back. But what's exciting you, right? On the flip side of that question, what is giving you excitement when you're looking at all these challenges, but you're still thinking, you know what, this is worth it. This is exciting. The
Mm.
industry's changing, critical minerals are booming. What's moving the needle for you?
Well, maybe I'm an optimist. I'm definitely an optimist, but
I think you have to be,
I
Clementine, to be in your business.
but definitely, I think I am really excited about this critical mineral buzz and the sort of reframing of the importance of a variety of energy solutions in the region and how that's like opened up more welcome foreign investment and into the regions in which we operate. And I suppose that we're really hoping that all of the efforts are going to lead to more Canadian, American, Japanese, European investors into the mines and the offshore oil and gas assets and the other energy developments in our region because that's like much needed. There's been a real, I guess, like single dominance over the last 10 years, especially in the DRC. We have many valuable Chinese clients, but it is much more difficult to align on our values
Sure.
and to kind of build a long-term sustainable supplier customer relationship. And so like I think for us as a business, we're really excited to see some real players looking at investments in both Zambia, Namibia, DRC, Tanzania. We're really excited to see finally progress on the Mozambique offshore plays and
Right. Of
Namibian
course.
market developing. Like to us, the more sort of clients who really value safety, who really value creating value and thinking longer term, the more fun it is, to be honest,
Sure.
to be
Right.
building a business.
Operating from the same sort of first principles. That's a good lead in to the question that's probably on a lot of people's mind who think critical minerals. Tell us about your approach to and involvement with the Lobito Corridor. And I know you have played a pretty active role both on a kind of public policy side, but also as a user of the corridor, so to speak. Tell us how you guys are engaging with that.
I think, even though we started off or we are really by definition a trucking company, we absolutely believe in the potential of rail and the importance to any industrialized sort of region. But there needs to be like some major changes specifically on libido, I think that would make that corridor be able to operate at scale.
Sure.
And we would absolutely welcome the opportunity to kind of look at, okay, how can we create a more almost like a privatized concession on the DRC section that would allow the investment and upgrades to happen? Or how we're all actively looking at investing in rail to road sidings along that corridor. So we definitely see ourselves as a key logistics operator and infrastructure developer, but today the volume that actually moves is extremely limited.
So you're cautiously optimistic, but there's some heavy lifting that has to be done to make it truly viable.
Yeah, there's some significant in change in contracting and infrastructure development that needs to be done to make that corridor as sort of voluminous as a Dar es
Sure.
Salaam or Durban corridor.
So comparing them to those that are most active right now, they're it's not there yet in terms of the pieces of the puzzle in place, right?
Yeah,
Speaking,
not
I
yet.
mean, right. I mean, a big part of that, a big part of all of this, of course, is the public policy side, local government engagement. Give us a couple examples of governments that you're working with that are policies that are coming that you're pretty excited about.
I think every country goes through its cycles, and that's why we're very diversified between many. I mean, whether
Right.
it's the US, the UK, or any African country, I think we all know that there's ups and downs.
Sure.
But I'd say a consistent bright spot from an ease of doing business perspective is Rwanda. It's so welcoming and like clear as
Right.
to what the rules are and how to invest, and that's really refreshing. We just hope that it will continue to grow into a regional market because it's such a small market. What's really exciting when you go to Rwanda is you've got super bright people who are sort of motivated and incentivized to make business work better,
Right.
which is awesome. And I think, they allow dual citizenship, which I think is a huge help. So you've got a lot of people who've worked and studied in other countries returning to Rwanda.
Canadian, Rwandan passport holders, right? And
Exactly, which is, it's so exciting to see that freedom of movement so that people can actually come back and try and create something in the same way that they've
yeah,
seen maybe in other countries.
yeah,
And I think like maybe on the flip side, Tanzania is where we started our business. It's where I lived for almost a decade. Uh, it really is our home. But today, the changing legislative environment makes it absolutely impossible to to invest over any term. And
right,
so, for specifically, I think in 2018, they introduced their first local content legislation that affected the mining, oil, and gas sectors, mining first. And that was then updated in 2019 based on the percentage ownership required by
right,
indigenous personnel. And in 2025, that was changed to 100% indigenous ownership. So that basically to do almost anything in the mining, oil, and gas sectors. So that's extremely difficult as a any non-national investor in the
right,
country to have to adapt to. And I think like that the amount of changes that it went through, it makes sort of thinking about how you're going to grow a sustainable company there long term almost impossible. And what would work better is to kind of have some rules and then be able to stick to them. And we
right.
all know that's
That's
difficult
always
for any
investors
country,
typically like that, right?
but we do like that.
Yeah. Tanzania, like you said, you lived there for a decade and, such a wonderful place, but sort of there seems always to be two steps forward, three steps, or maybe 10 steps backwards. And in the last year, Tanzania has been such a disappointment in many respects, right? Governance and, like you were saying, investor climate. And we have President Hassan today. She's in Moscow, her first foreign trip since the elections last year, right? So the winds don't seem to be blowing in a terribly encouraging direction there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's that optimistic side. Like we love, we love it there. We have the most amazing team on the ground
Right.
in Tanzania, like such skilled personnel. And so, we really want to be there long term, but it would be great if the environment and the
That's got
political
to be a
environment
two-way
can be
street,
a little
right?
bit more inviting. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. With everything you've laid out here, I think truly sort of the warts and all look that you've given us, where do you see African logistics in 10 years? Is it still going to be that 2-month turnaround? Is it still going to be, how do I get per diem to my driver on the side of the road? Where do you guys see yourselves in 10 years, the sector in 10 years? Is it going to be a sea change or, again, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back?
I I don't unfortunately, I think, what's always exciting about Africa is there's areas that almost leapfrog developments in other countries. And I think we'll definitely see that in the form of some of the maybe tolling infrastructure for some systems and processes where AI can really help. But there's so much infrastructure investment that would be needed to, let's say, go all driverless vehicles
Right.
or to move fully to rail. And yet we have this population that, is growing. I think a quarter of the world's population is going to be on the African continent by
Indeed.
2035. So,
Right.
you've got a huge job market that's literally being born. And so I still think that due to the combination of the infrastructure required to kind of be electric or have rail in all the right places, and the fact that we have a bunch of people who will need jobs, we're going to be slower than other markets. It's a huge continent with a lot of disparate regions. So I still think, unfortunately, road transport and drivers are going to be a big part in 10 years. But I do think that we should see an acceleration of exploration in the mining space. We should see an acceleration of a lot of the administrative processes that slow us down. And we should see a big acceleration of the route to market rail corridors that we can connect with.
Right. Just shift a little bit on the talent side. You were saying you guys go from the blue collar sort of skills, labor, all the way up to those who can run these very complicated logistics operations. How do you go about finding talent?
It's a bit of a combination, but I'd say that we've had the most success in taking young graduates and putting them through our business really as their training ground and kind of teaching the culture of continual improvement and customer focus and change. So, for in Tanzania, we have a tracking team, and in Zambia, we have a border liaison team, and in South Africa, it's like a finance team. But in every country, we try to have a pool of graduates and that kind of get familiar with the business, and then we kind of pick out of that pool as we have positions open up, and that provides like a great training ground. And it's not always easy to create a graduate program, but here it really has paid the biggest dividends.
I'm just thinking again back to GE experience. We faced the challenge at times of trying to get, particularly in South Africa, young people interested in sort of heavy industry, locomotives or gas turbines or other less sexy industries, right? You guys, I hate to say it, maybe on one of the less sexy industry sides, of things. But do you find that as a headwind, so to speak, or the fact that you are a strong brand that treats employees well, that you don't find a difficulty bringing a 24-year-old in to work on your IT systems or in the finance function?
Well, I think you're right in the sense that if we look at like our graduate program, we are not hiring transport and logistics graduates. We're hiring graduates from all different focus areas. And I think that's like an important note for graduates. You don't have to study what you're going to do. Just be passionate about whatever it is you're learning and go from there. So, we do struggle to find top talent that have studied our industry. So we just look for top talent and train them on the industry. And I think probably it reached its peak sort of in the post-COVID remote work, Gen Z, work-life balance sort of culture. But we are seeing a shift in that and like a kind of like a realization that, there is value to in-person business, which we are a fully in-person business. There is value you know, to logistics and to critical minerals, and it's an important industry. So I'd say that tide's turning a bit as far as interest in the industry, though we do, it's not, as you say, it's not the most beautiful, relaxing thing. You can't work when you want to work. Like our clients want to know what's going on 24 hours a day. And yes, the trucks stop at night, but they are up at 5 a.m. and moving, and we need to be there as well.
It's probably not what you go into when you flexibility and working from your sweatpants is a priority for you. But
We don't
tell
mind
us,
sweatpants in the office. That's fine.
right? Sweatpants in the office or in the truck, as long as it's moving at 5:01, right?
Exactly.
Right. So
Exactly.
as we approach the end here, with your unbelievable professional experience, the journey has been so interesting. What are some advice? We're talking about the MBA. Hopefully I can get my act together and write an Alistair Group case study. What would you say if you're in the classroom, you're the guest? What are some advice that you would give young people who have particularly the desire not to go work for a mainstream strategy consultancy or an investment bank and want to do something truly out of the ordinary like you've done? What are two or three pieces of advice you would tell somebody who says, you know what, I don't want to do the normal thing. I want to follow the Alistair Group path?
I think the first thing is what I said before is I firmly don't believe it matters what you study as long as you sort of crave learning and you take the opportunity to study to actually enjoy learning for the sake of learning, and that lifelong interest will actually drive what you end up doing and how you can build something. Is if you're interested in what's going on, how could you do that better, then you'll find that you develop solutions. I think a second thing is probably never let someone else define what good looks like. Even today, we find now that we're 20 years old, it's actually a harder thing to get across in the business is just because we've always done it this way doesn't mean it's the right way. Like, or just because that company we see there does it this way, it doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. And constantly forcing ourselves to try and think differently about a solution. And for an individual to think better about like what would be the path or how else could we do this is really important. And I think the third thing is, family business has its pros and cons, but I'd say the
Sure.
pros outweigh the cons. If you can work with somebody who you literally innately share values and culture with, it makes it a lot easier.
You as the youngest and the only girl in the family, I'm sure by the time you and your brother decided to launch this business, you had figured out a strategy for how best to work together.
It's
Yeah.
evolving. It's
It's-
evolving. And now our eldest brother's in the business as well. So it's all very exciting.
oh, I love it. I love it. I didn't realize that. Would you encourage someone though, like you said, you went to work for the events management company for a few years in London. Would you tell somebody go get the 3, 4, 5 years experience? It's something more mainstream, right? As opposed to being the entrepreneur from the day you're given your MBA. Or if the idea is good enough, should they go out and do it the day after they walk out of the classroom?
I think it really depends. I think my brother innately had that sort of sense of entrepreneurship and that confidence.
Right.
Whereas for me, I think the experience and like building that confidence over a few years of actual practical hands-on running a business. And then I feel like business school was almost better be described for me, at least as a language course. It allowed you to talk the talk when you were talking to investors and like kind of know the lingo, which was really helpful in the fundraising stage and the building confidence among investors stage. So everybody will have a different path there.
Right.
And I think for us together, that combination of like, you know, innate entrepreneurial like smell of a business that my brother has with like a bit more like how do we give credibility structure
Right.
to this has been a good combination.
Well, I think it's a great data point that I know corporate finance tends to be the hurdle for so many MBA students. And if they could just offer a class of like how to talk corporate finance, maybe not necessarily really do it, right? But like you say, you do need to understand discounted cash flow and all the various other terms that
Yeah.
don't come with outside of an MBA program, right? So last question, one we always end on, and it's very interesting because we've had, from geopolitical specialists to journalists in Kyiv and such, what are 1 to 2 books that you would recommend? Of course, you can give us your favorite book about trucking in Africa, but also more, what have been good books on your leadership journey?
As I was thinking about this question, I thought, I guess three things stood out to me. One is the best book club I've ever been in is one that we kind of created when I first moved here to Joburg. And we didn't have a book a month, we had a theme a month. And it was
I
a
like it.
great way to kind of read around something. And I remember one of our themes was kind of South African history and African
Right.
history. And I love the combination of authors that we read that month. And so, out of that one, I would say there was the Bang Bang Club by
Great Greg Marinovich,
yeah,
right?
yeah, Greg Maranovich. And then there was Indaba My Children. There was, and there we also had some like the Zanzibar chest and some more traditional sort of
Right.
tales. But I thought that combination of like how do you read around a lot of different narratives and histories of Africa from both people from all different sides of Africa and all different backgrounds has been a great way to kind of learn to love and appreciate and grow and understand this continent.
That's
So
great.
maybe my initial love probably started with my dad reading us King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard, but
Rider
I think
Haggard.
it's
Yeah.
evolved significantly since
Yeah,
then.
yeah. Well, I think that's part of the story, right? It's part of the narrative shift in Africa. Put it simply, right?
But yeah, but I mean, I'm guilty of probably being less of a business book reader and more of a just a good good novel. And so last night I stayed up way too late finishing The Correspondent by Virginia Evans, which was just such a creatively written novel, partially set in Annapolis, Maryland, near to where I'm from. But that is all written in the form of letters. And actually, I recently was studying Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and you kind of realize that leadership question has been around for literally centuries, and how what makes up a good leader, but actually just kind of putting pen to paper sometimes and being a bit more old fashioned instead of asking Claude how to be a good leader, but like really thinking it through yourself and
Sure.
and how would those qualities be defined and writing that down helps a lot. So
Yeah, no, meditations. You're the first person in 32 episodes to mention it, and yeah, it should probably be on every leader's shelf. Just sort of his notes to himself, right? What a great suggestion,
yeah.
and along with the correspondent too. So, and the Bang Bang Club. So we'll put those all in the show notes. Clementine, thank you very much. I mean, we have covered trucking distances from Kolwezi to Dar to Marcus Aurelius, right? So that's a sign of a good podcast interview when you can go as the length and breadth of that. So, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you the next time I'm in Joburg.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. That was great fun.